Our next speaker is going to be Garrett Dietrick. He's Xcel Energy's Director of Governance, Risk, and Compliance. Garrett and his team are responsible for security and technology policies and standards, security risk management, and information governance. He holds several industry-leading certifications, including Certified Information Systems Security Professional, Certified Information Systems Auditor, and Certified Information Security Manager. Garrett will share with us today how we can stay vigilant when it comes to protecting our critical systems and data. Everyone, please help me welcome to the podium Garrett Dietrick of Xcel Energy.
Thank you, and thank you. This has been a great event. It's really nice being able to gather and discuss with our peers and learn more about how we're securing our environments today. Just a little bit of note about Xcel. Xcel services 8 different states in the Midwest and West. We here in South Dakota, we've been providing service for over 100 years, and with that, we're the largest utility in the state. We currently serve 92,000 customers here, and one of the things that's really we take a lot of pride in is when it comes to wind energy, providing clean, reliable energy. This is something that we have 2 wind farms that will be coming to the state. We're the largest wind provider in the nation. So looking at some of the items that are serving South Dakota here, we covered a few of these. A couple other areas to note is just in regard to jobs, right? We have over 100 employees of the state of South Dakota, and in addition, in regard to taxes and spending in the state, we certainly provide a lot of value. Looking at the wind farms that we'll be providing here in the state, there's over 900 megawatts of power that'll be provided. Again, it's providing that clean, reliable, safe means to providing secure, reliable energy in the state here. So, for today's agenda regarding to the topic I'd like to discuss is really focused on a couple key areas. And then from an agenda perspective, I'm going to be looking and talking through establishing a foundation, assessing and performing inputs, findings, exceptions, and observations, business impact analysis. Where'd that come in? And then remediation mitigation. What do we do and how we're going to fix things when we identify there's issues. When establishing a foundation, a lot of organizations have done this in the past, and typically in the past this has been driven by compliance, really looking at what are we regulated by, what are our mandates of our organization, whether we're a healthcare organization, whether we're a finance, or whether we're an industry such as Xcel with utilities. We really have to stay and focus on what are our policies, our standards, and our controls. And then also look at what are those regulations that are tied back, and then industry best practices. A couple that have been brought up here today, Adam Sedgwick from NIST. We're currently a subscriber of learning and understanding how we can use the NIST framework. We look at C2M2, which is a means for us to assess our organization from a regulatory perspective. Special Agent Patel talked about ISO. ISO is truly the foundation of what we built our policies on. We looked at, from an ISO perspective, International Organization of Standardization, to help us provide that better understanding of where is our baseline. What should we really make sure that we are at least meeting from a regulatory perspective as well as a security perspective. Jim Edmond provided some information about state laws. We have a new privacy law here in the state of South Dakota being enacted in July, it sounds like. We need to make sure when we're looking at these regulations that we're starting to align with what those regulations state. Make sure that our policies and standards and controls adhere to those to make sure that we're doing the right thing not only for our company but also our state and country. There's other areas such as industry best practices that may not have been discussed here today. Typically, a lot of audit departments will use COBIT as their baseline to understand the environment. There's COSO, there's also PCI. PCI is not necessarily a regulation, but it's a means that we protect our credit cards and the use of those cards in the industry. You know, that impacts almost everyone here to some extent, and we certainly want to make sure we're doing the best we can from that regard. Jumping into assessments and inputs, as we all are aware, we have auditors coming in here, there, and everywhere. And I've been very fortunate to work in many industries. And what you'll find is you'll have auditors for a HIPAA assessment, and then a PCI assessment, and then you have a Sarbanes-Oxley assessment, and you got all these assessments coming into play. One of the things that we need to do is make sure that when we're doing these assessments, the outcomes of those assessments roll up into a centralized repository that we as an organization can assess and understand that risk to the company. Not necessarily just from a compliance perspective, but also from a security perspective. With that, when we look at from a vendor perspective, and I know a lot of you have vendor management programs out there. You take a couple of these vendors that have been in the news recently, and we talk about, I think we brought up Equifax today. There was a large retail company in Minnesota that might have been hacked in the past here. There's Yahoo, it's been mentioned today, Kaspersky. I mean, these are things that have been in the news today, and these are vendors that might be providing services to you or other organizations that you work with, such as fourth layer of vendors. So one of the things that we do at Xcel Energy is to ensure that we properly vet these vendors to ensure that when they're interacting with Xcel, that we're protecting not only ourselves but also our customers. It's one of the things we take pride in. We look at other areas such as project risk assessments. When we're starting a new project at the organization today, we help to understand what type of information is going to be intervening between this project and going forward. Is it confidential? Should we put more due diligence on this? So we'll look to understand what are the controls in place. We've talked a little bit about controls and how we should ensure the controls are in place and working properly. We want to continue to do that when we're working with projects. Another thing that we've done this coming year will be what we call application risk assessments. And it means of understanding what our applications, what risks they present to our organization today. So we identify who the owner of the application is, and we get a better understanding what's being stored in the application, how is it transmitting data, et cetera, et cetera. Is it encrypted, et cetera, right? So we want to make sure that we have a proper understanding of how those environments are being assessed and mandated. Now, with that comes findings, exceptions, and observations. And when you think about it, most organizations, I'll call them exceptions, some call them findings, and others observations, right? So it depends on who you work with and where you've been. They're all very important to us. And what we want to do is make sure when there's non-conformance to something within your policy standards or controls, that you track that information, you monitor it over time. If you have something that's critical to your organization that's considered a finding, make sure you track and monitor that. And maybe that's every 5 days, maybe that's every month, depending on the criticality that might be for your environment. It's something that really ties back to when you talk about risk management, the likelihood of an event taking place. So if we have multiple vulnerabilities or threats out there, the likelihood of an event to take place is greater. And so that brings me to one of the slide that I really put a question mark on is business impact analysis. Now, this has been something that's been very intriguing to me over time that, and I've been discussing this at other conferences, is regard to business impact analysis. And really, we're at a security conference. We're really not talking about business continuity and disaster recovery planning. What's the true meaning behind this? When it comes to business impact analysis, you work directly with the business to better understand the impacts to your organization. You better understand the processes that are in place. You better understand the impact if that process either had a denial of service or maybe it had some ransomware. What is the impact to our organization? How is that going to play a role? So one of the key things when talking about risk management is we oftentimes think about just only the likelihood of an event taking place. But when we can start better understanding a business process and what that business process has, whether it's vendors that support the process, systems that support it, applications that support it, maybe even facilities. A lot of times when we're looking at from a utility industry, we look at what facilities are protecting that information or protecting that environment. So we can better understand what the impact side of the house is for risk management. So we can take a look at the threats that might be impacting our systems and those systems which are supporting our applications, and we can understand the impact to the organization as a whole, whether it might be a financial impact, maybe it's a legal perspective. Maybe we're having some issues when it comes to the South Dakota state privacy laws. Obviously I need to work with those folks to make sure we're doing the right thing there. But it also may have an impact to your brand or operations, as well as your strategic vision. So when we identify the impacts and the likelihoods of events, of findings, observations, et cetera, we want to make sure we do something about those. We want to understand how do we mitigate, how do we remediate that particular issue. These are two topics that are really intertwined amongst organizations, what they truly mean. Remediation, really correct the finding, to fix it. Mitigation, how do we mitigate that event from being as great as it could be? We can reduce and lessen the likelihood. I know that we've also talked with Jared from Marsh earlier, and we're looking at cyber insurance. I know that cyber insurance certainly plays a key role when we talk about risk management. Do we accept that type of risk? What are we going to accept and how much of the risk are we going to accept? How are we going to move forward? But these are certainly key aspects when we identify the risk, and then we can better understand the impacts to the organization and how it will impact from a financial, et cetera. So we want to make sure we identify those remediation plans and mitigation plans, and then also follow up on those periodically, right? So if we have something that's considered a high risk to the organization, we can't just let it go and say, yeah, we're going to get that project in 2018. Well, 2018 goes by, and all of a sudden we're in 2019. Where is that risk now? What did we do to fix that? So one of the keys when you're talking about risk management in your organization from a security perspective, let's make sure we follow up and manage that risk, whether it's either through remediation plans or mitigating actions. So. And then looking really at this last slide, and I think it's one of those things that I take from my career here is really as a security professional, and it's been mentioned several times here, is embedding security into the DNA of our environments. What can we do as practitioners of security in our everyday work? We've talked about security hygiene, and I really love the idea of security exercise. I think I need more security exercise, to be honest with you. It's my issue, but I was thinking, you know, when we do our diligence, we perform our jobs, it doesn't only impact what we're doing on that system application, that facility, that vendor. How do we help our other clients within our organization? How do we help the folks within our companies better understand, hey, when you get a form and it asks for your username and password, you know, this phishing attacks, it's becoming more and more prevalent. You know, when you have systems and applications external to your organization, these folks are going to spear phish you and determine, hey, we need to better understand what you're doing. They'll get your credentials. Someone's going to send a form out, a survey, and it may look and feel like something your CEO is sending out or something. You got to be diligent about that. But again, it's about performing that diligence, performing that security hygiene, ensuring that you're doing that training and awareness continuously through the program. So with that, I'd like to thank you all again. Appreciate the time. This has been a great event. Thank you.